Hello, welcome back. Federalist Boss here to talk to you guys about how to write an argument essay. Normally that is question 4 on the AP exam administration, but this year things are a little bit different. And we only have 2 questions, and one of those questions will be the question for the argument essay. So I'm creating this video just to help you guys to go through what are the kind of things that you can expect to see and what are the issues or things that you should look out for. Good news is this is actually the essay that I read when I went to Salt Lake City to grade the exam last year. So I have a lot of experience with this. I read over 1,000 argument essays, and I know exactly what we're looking for because I was one of those people that was looking to grade those. So this question that I'm going to throw at you guys is actually from a practice exam that the AP released once they changed their curriculum. So it's not from a former exam, and so they don't really have a solid rubric on it, but I went ahead and I created my own rubric for it, and we can just kind of keep it open-ended, basically. So I'm going to read out the question to you guys, and I'm just going to tell you how I would approach solving it and the kind of things that you would want to do and think about as you're planning out how to write this essay. So it says, develop an argument that explains which of the 3 models of representative democracy, participatory, pluralist, or elite, best achieves the founders' intent for democracy in terms of ensuring a stable government run by the people. So basically, they've given you the 3 models there, the 3 models of representative democracy, and they want you to choose. Choose one of those. Now, of course, you could go, well, they wanted a combination of all 3 and da-da-da-da. No, you can't do that in this type of essay. You have to make, just like your English teacher taught you, to write a good argument essay, you need to pick a side and you need to defend that side, basically. And so this essay will require you to use knowledge from the foundational documents. They're going to give you foundational documents, but you can also use for a second piece of evidence, a Supreme Court case or some other material or historical evidence you learned from the class, basically. So let's go through. This is the question prompt, basically. So it says use at least one piece of evidence from the foundational documents. The documents for this one, they're giving to us Brutus 1, Fed 10, and the U.S. Constitution. They say in our response, we should do the following. Respond to the prompt with a defensible claim or thesis that establishes a line of reasoning. That is so important, that line of reasoning, having a thesis and having it actually connect and relate to the prompt. Support your claim with at least 2 pieces of specific and relevant evidence. One piece must come from one of the foundational documents, and the other could come from the foundational documents as well. It doesn't have to be a second document, though, so you can't pick 2 pieces of evidence from the same document. Or it could be stuff that you've learned throughout the course. Okay, so let's go ahead and, the first thing to do when you're writing these kinds of essays is you want to go back to the content. You want to go back and understand, well, what exactly are those 3 types of democracy? Let me think about those, and then I'll decide what the founders best intended by understanding what those are. Because truly, the founders did want a model of all kind of 3 of these. And all 3 of these you can find in the Constitution and in the structure of our country and all that kinds of stuff. So we've got participatory. That's the model of democracy in which citizens have power to decide directly on policy. So I try to remember that that's openly activating or encouraging, that's the word I'm looking for, openly encouraging participation in our democracy. Then we have a pluralist democracy, and that's a model where basically you have no one group that dominates. You've got many groups that are kind of fighting each other out, and they're competing to influence policy and power. And so because they're kind of checking each other, basically, you're not going to have one group dominate and take it all. And then you've got the elite democracy, and that's a model of democracy where you've got just basically a small number of people, usually the wealthy and the well-educated, to basically influence decision-making. So let's go through, and again, if I was writing this essay, I could take all 3 of those, and I could write an essay to defend. That's what the founders intended, basically. And I would have different evidence to defend, different arguments, basically. The first thing you're going to want to do is choose your argument. Understand which path you're going to take, basically. Now, in this case, there's actually 3 paths that we can take. A lot of times, though, it's an either or. It's like you either believe this or you believe this, basically. So what path do you want to take? One of the funniest things that I remember from my reading when I was in Salt Lake City this past summer was there was a kid who literally wrote 2 pages arguing one. And then at the end of it, he goes, and these pages were like kind of crossed out, not really, but I still was kind of reading through them because I was curious and extremely bored because I'm reading thousands of essays a day. And so it was funny because he at the end of that second page was like, as I'm writing this, I'm realizing that the other argument actually holds more truth or is more true. So please ignore everything that I wrote above, and I'm going to rewrite my essay with the other argument. And it was funny because I went back and looked and I was like, yeah, he definitely, as he was writing, decided, wait a minute, I'm saying this, but I'm actually thinking this. And so I better have the different argument in my thesis because all my evidence is supporting this and I'm saying that. I better say this now in my thesis, basically. So he was smart because he realized that, but he realized it midstream, which, I mean, he was able to figure it out and still write a quality essay, and because he had more time because it was the regular administration. So that was good for this student. But you just want to be careful because some students want to just start writing right away. And I'm going to say caution and don't do that. You don't want to start writing right immediately. You want to think about the prompt and then choose which path you're going to take. Remember that there's not one right path. There might be one that's easier to defend. Might be one that you believe in more or you feel like the documents support more. And that's up to you and you're deciding on how you're going to write. But there's not one right answer. I promise you, these essays, the way they're written, there's not just, it's only this argument and you better defend it. That's not the point of this. The point of this is that, wait a minute, you could choose either argument and it's the defense that matters, basically. So you want to think about what evidence you're going to use, looking at the foundational documents, and I'd start with that as my first piece of evidence. And then the second piece, thinking about, well, what do I have an example from history that I can use or something we learned in the course, or the Supreme Court case relates to that, so I could bring that up as just as a supporting piece. The important thing to remember is that it's not one right answer, like I said. It doesn't matter what side you choose. What matters is the evidence and reasoning you choose to support your thesis claim. Definitely in the one that I read, there was a lot more students that chose one path over the other. And I did find that one was maybe easier for them to defend, but I still read a lot of quality, great essays arguing the other side. So it really does not, please do not think that there's one right answer. It's best, there's an answer that's right based on what you think you can defend and you can argue the best. The next step is basically building your thesis language around your prompt language, basically. So you need a thesis. That is the one important thing I will have to say. Without it, you will not pass this exam. Because without the thesis, you can only get, I think, 1 to 2 points on this, which means you're not going to pass. You need a thesis. That's the first thing. So that's the thing you want to look out for first. Underline your thesis. Please put it in your opening paragraph. Now, the College Board says you can put the thesis anywhere. But as a reader, from my experience, it was way easier to read and grade when a student had it clear and it was the end of that first paragraph. And even when they underlined it, it just made my job that much easier to know. So I didn't have to go hunting for this thesis and that kinds of stuff. So it doesn't matter where you put it, but I'm going to recommend your opening paragraph. I'm going to recommend underlining for you to remind yourself what your thesis is, to keep yourself honest and accountable, but also for your reader, it helps them. And we always want to try to make the reader's job easier because that just makes them more happier when they're grading our essay. Restate the thesis at the end of your essay. I just think it's a good idea. You don't have to do this, but I just recommend it. Again, it's just going to keep your reminder okay. And it's a good just way to end your kind of essay. Make sure your thesis has a line of reasoning. So the because has to connect to the argument. It can't just be because that doesn't connect to your argument or doesn't relate to it all. And so I have a couple line of reasonings later on that we'll take a look at and that we can see what those support and what those look like. So I need to say it again. You need a thesis and don't try to hedge bets. Please don't try to. I know some students are like, wait a minute, I'm just going to argue all sides and I can't be wrong. No, you will be wrong on this test. They told us specifically when we were grading this, if they try to argue both, no points. That doesn't count as a thesis. That's not an argumentative essay. Your English teacher wouldn't allow you to do that. And so now neither would the AP test. Okay. Here we go. I have some prompt language right here because we did an assignment in class where I basically used the prompt language. So blank, which was one of those 3 models, best achieves the founder's intent for American democracy in terms of ensuring a stable government run by the people because all of that, guys, this is not my language. This is all the prompt language, basically. And I would recommend you use the same prompt language. It will keep you honest. I don't mean just restate the prompt. You need to add some new stuff in there. First of all, you have to pick a side. And then second of all, you have to have a reasoning and argument behind that side. So again, you can choose any one of the 3 in this case, or it could be either or if it's 2 options. But you just have to defend yourself and explain your reasoning. And important note too, to just put yourself in the right context. For example, when I was thinking about how I would approach this and write this if I was a student, I started thinking about things like contemporary examples. And I was like, wait a minute, I can't do that. They're saying, what did the founders intend, basically? What did they mean to do? So be very careful to kind of use those contemporary examples that weren't really related to the founders in their time. Okay, the next step is your first piece of evidence that probably should come from one of those documents. You need at least one piece of evidence from the document. It could be your second piece if you want, but I would just recommend it. Make it your first piece. just keep it clarified and clear. So explain how the ideas in your document support your claim. Be clear and make the direct connection to your argument. Keep connecting it back. Keep going, this is why, and this relates because. And even if you feel like you're being redundant, don't worry about it. You're probably doing great. So I have basically blank is a document about, please just introduce and tell us the purpose and context of your document. It'll just let your reader know that you know what you're talking about. And then you can't just define the document. Obviously, you could Google what Fed 10 is, right? But that's not going to help you support a claim of what you think is the best representative democracy or the best type of democracy that the founders intended. Okay, and then reasoning. Connect the evidence back to the thesis. So make sure you connect it and use that reasoning in there, basically. And just connect it back and make sure you're relating it back to that. That's really, really important. Okay, then you're going to use a second piece of evidence. So second document, it could be a court case. It could be knowledge from the course. Define the evidence again, explain its purpose and contents, explain how the ideas support your second claim or support your claim, but the second evidence piece supports that claim, basically. Be clear and make the direct connection to your arguments. Again, this is just the same. Blank is blank, and this supports my claim because, and this connects back to my thesis because this. It's okay to keep restating your thesis. That's totally okay. Keep restating your argument. That's fine. Again, if you feel like you're being redundant, it's fine. As long as you don't contradict yourself. So writing too much is only a problem if you contradict yourself. If you say the Electoral College is good for the country and it helps the country, and then later on you say it's bad for the country and hurts the country, that's where they might not, that's where they might ding you for overwriting, basically, because that's just contradicting yourself. But let's say you're just, being verbose or writing too much, they don't care. That's just going to help support them, make sure that you know what you're talking about. The last step is the conclusion. Now, you don't really need a conclusion for this, but some students like to put a conclusion. It helps. There might be something you write in your conclusion that could be like the last thing that your reader needs to read to go, yep, they got it. Yep, that's great reasoning. Yep, that's it. So I would always say, as I always do say, over-explain and over-describe. It's okay to be redundant. And if you have time, please reread your response and include any last thoughts or clarifications at the end. If you miss something, don't try to do the arrows. Don't try to do the cross out, that kinds of stuff. Just go ahead and write at the end and go, I forgot to add that this relates to this because this isn't this. If that's out of order, again, an English teacher might mind and say that should have been in the heart of your essay. It's okay. Because if I, the reader, see that and go, wow, they really didn't make that last connection, and then they make it in the conclusion, I can go, yep, let me give them that point for reasoning. They nailed it there. So here, guys, is just basically an outline. I went through and I was like, okay, can I argue all three? Yes, of course I can. So I just kind of just went through what evidence pieces would I use, and this is just an overview. Obviously, if I was writing an essay about this, I'd go into much more detail. So if I was going to say participatory, that was the founder's intent, I would basically just say that I would use the U.S. Constitution, and I would argue about and I would talk about the Republican form of government. I would define that that's representative democracy. That means that the founders intended for people to be involved. They wanted people voting for their leaders, and they also had, short elections with only 2 years in between election cycles, basically. And that really shows that they wanted people to participate and vote and choose their leaders. For Fed 10, it talks about, more so Fed 10 supports the pluralist, but you can use Fed 10 because it talks about factions as inevitable and as a representation of American democracy. So just basically that we wanted people to get involved and form political parties and get involved and participate in the political process. So the line of reasoning on that, basically what I would use in my thesis is I would just say that the founders wanted to protect against tyranny. I would say they wanted participatory because they want to protect against tyranny, basically one person dominating, one person taking over everything. If I was going to argue pluralist, Fed 10, I would use, talk about factions, talk about just that they're inevitable, and that also that basically the reason why we wanted a large republic that James Madison talked about is so that these factions can be controlled by each other, basically. And that's basically the idea of pluralism. You've got so many groups. You've got an anti-abortion group, and then you've got, a pro-choice group. And so they're going to be competing with each other. No one group is going to dominate. And together, we're all going to be creating better public policy that's going to support us all. I also said the First Amendment, and I was using like the freedom of assembly, basically, that the founders wanted us to assemble. They wanted us to get together and form groups. Also, interest groups is an evidence piece that you'd use. That would be knowledge from the course. That's not a specific foundational document. But that's knowledge from the course. If you discussed interest groups and discussed their purpose and discussed basically that even though they're not mentioned specifically in the Constitution, they do represent the idea of pluralism and advocating for good public policy on a group level or group dynamic basis. For my line of reasoning for that one, I said because the founders wanted to ensure that no one group dominates the government. Lastly, and that's basically just the language from pluralism, the definition. The lastly is the elite. And now, to be honest, I'm going to reveal myself. This is what I genuinely believe. I mean, of course, I believe they kind of wanted pieces of participatory and pieces of pluralist, but I know the founders to be these elitists, these really rich guys who wanted to protect their property and wanted people to participate and wanted the citizenry. But still, there were some things that they put in there that makes me feel like they just didn't trust the public, maybe their knowledge or their education level, or maybe that they were afraid because they were rich and they were worried about poor people and stuff like that. Anyway, so the elite, if I was going to use the elite thing, I would use Brutus. But basically, Brutus, remember, is arguing against the Constitution. So I would basically say that Brutus is arguing against the elitist model and against what the founders intended. And the strong, powerful government of the elites, of the federal government, is going to control everything and take away the states and all that kind of stuff. So I would use Brutus, but I'd have to be careful with that because I'd have to make sure that I explain that Brutus is arguing against the elitist model because he believes that's what the founders intended when they created the Constitution. The last thing I would say is that the Constitution itself, to me, there's pieces of it that represent the elitist model, specifically the Electoral College. If you wanted participatory, you would just have a one person, one vote. You would just do a popular vote. That's my argument around that. The founders specifically did not choose one person, one vote. They didn't go for a popular vote. They went with the Electoral College, which means that even if you win the most votes, you don't necessarily win the election. So that is much more of like an elitist type like model that we don't trust the people to decide. So we're going to have this model to make sure that we ensure that the people that we like are getting into offices. And then lastly, the Senate too. That specifically is more so of like an elitist model of like the recognizing that the small states should get more representation than the large states in that house, basically. The line of reasoning for this was because they said that because the founders did not want a pure democracy and did not trust the citizenry, basically. So if I were writing this essay, I think I would have the easiest time arguing the elite. And I think genuinely that's because that's what I believe about the founders. But I could write an essay about all three and I could earn maximum points as long as I have a thesis, I have two evidence pieces, I explain the evidence pieces, and I connect them with a line of reasoning back to my thesis. So that's the big things that you need to include. That's the things you need to focus on. So here is the rubric for this. If you want to take a look at this, and I will link this into the description below. I'll also go ahead and link where you can find this on the College Board. There's also practice student responses that you can read too, which are really cool to kind of see how did other students answer them. And then also how were those responses graded? What are the things that they're looking for, basically? So I'll make sure to link those in the description below or email me if you can't find those or if you need help with any support with that. So the first point is the thesis. That's it, basically. It was the easiest thing to grade as a reader. I was just like, do they have it or not? Are they just restating the prompt? Or are they actually making a claim and actually providing some reasoning behind it? So that's an easy one. It's just making a thesis and then having that line of reasoning. The second row is going to be your evidence. And so you get one piece of evidence that's relevant to the topic. You'll get a point for that. And then if it supports your thesis, you're going to get a second point. And then the second piece, if you explain it and connect it to your thesis, you're also going to get 2 points for that. Now, normally you only get 3 points in this row. If you see here, they added a second row for the evidence. So basically you get a point for explaining the evidence and a point for connecting it to your thesis, and then a point for explaining the second piece of evidence, and then a second point, or a fourth point really, for connecting it to the thesis. So that's one of the changes, that basically just another point that you could get. So more specific, more detail, connection to your evidence, that just helps to get you those points. All right, the last one is row C, which is the reasoning. They added another point for reasoning. That can be within, these don't have to be separate paragraphs, they can be within, but both you need to explain and connect your thing back to your thesis and then also connect it back to your reasoning, basically. So to earn this point, you must have a defensible claim and then have the evidence that supports it and then explain the relationship between the two. It's really about connecting and explaining that relationship. Now, in past exams, they did have a point for responding to a counterclaim and saying some people think this, but they're wrong because this, or they're right because this. That's not there anymore. So you do not need a counterclaim for 2020 exam administration. You basically just need a thesis, evidence, explaining the evidence, a second piece of evidence and explaining that, and then making sure those connect back to your thesis, basically. So, okay, right here is the link for the student samples with Rubric's course. So I recommend you check that out, and I will link that down in the description below. I believe that is it. That's awesome. Okay, so welcome. Thank you so much for coming and being here. I really appreciate you for being here. Go ahead and click on this if you want to subscribe to my channel. Go ahead and click on this next video because I think you'll enjoy it as well. All right, I love you all, Vikings. I'm going to keep creating videos on the daily until the AP exam, which is May 11th. So please like and subscribe, comment if you have questions, email me, let me know how I can help you to pass that exams. Have a great day, Vikings.